Hi, this is Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support. I really do appreciate it. I have a number of people who support me on Patreon, and that means they contribute a little bit every month, anywhere from $1 to $9, somewhere in there generally. And as a result, there's some extra content on Patreon specifically for them, but it's stuff that maybe you've never heard before or seen before, so I wanted to make sure that I post something here on YouTube and VidMe every once in a while so that you can get an idea of what folks on Patreon are actually enjoying that you might want to check out yourself. So what's going to follow immediately after I get done with this little blurb is the 30-minute audio podcast I just recently posted. I think it's episode 17 of the podcast that's posted only on Patreon twice a month. Now, I also do a video podcast, and when I do the next one, I'll post that one on YouTube as well so that you can get a feel for what's happening there. This is the entire audio podcast. I haven't edited it at all, so you can get a feel for what I'm doing. And if you'd like to hear them on a regular basis, then check them out on Patreon. The link is in the description.
Get ready for certified USDA prime gun stuff on the GunGuyTV podcast.
Hi, this is Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for listening to my podcast, supporting me on Patreon, and doing the other incredible things you do to support GunGuyTV. I really do deeply appreciate it. Without you, the show would probably come to a screeching halt. It's only because of you that we've been able to buy some new equipment lately and improve the show as we go, and we're going to continue to do that to make sure that GunGuyTV on VidMe and YouTube and Patreon and wherever else we're able to continue to grow the show that will continue to make it better for you along the way. Well, in today's podcast, I wanted to just talk about some fun stuff rather than getting into all the political nonsense and the heated debates and all that kind of stuff that seems to happen so often when firearms or the Second Amendment or hunting or any of those things tend to come up in conversation. Instead, I thought we'd just, talk about some fun stuff, one of which is the age-old question of what is the best survival gun. Now, I've never been much of a prepper, I got to admit. I'm not the guy that, I don't have a what do you call it, the bomb shelter in my in my basement. I don't have a basement. I live in Southern California. We don't have basements out here. So I don't have a bomb shelter. I also don't have a bomb shelter in my backyard. So no fallout shelter, bomb shelter, or anything like that. And I must admit, I don't have caches of food and fuel and weapons and ammo stored in various places. So if I get there and when I get there, I know I can get to those. Now, maybe I should have all those things, but I got to admit that I don't have any of them. And so I don't think I qualify as an expert or predominantly excited prepper. Although I do believe that a person should be prepared for emergencies, I haven't taken it to quite those lengths. And I'm certainly not critical of people who have. I just haven't. We certainly have, emergency food and water and provisions and that kind of stuff. But we haven't gone quite to the lengths that I was describing before. And so that's just me. But as I started to think about survival guns, a few things popped into my head. First of all, survival, it seems to me, is not what people think of when they think about survival. And survival guns are not necessarily what people think of when they think about survival. A lot of times, if I mention survival guns to somebody, the first thing they think of is the AR-15, AK-47, some type of fighting rifle, because they're of the opinion that survival means getting in a gunfight and winning. And I submit to you that that's the Hollywood excitement fantasy version. I would bet that survival means more being stealthy, making sure people don't know you're around so they can't rob you or kill you, and hunting a little bit while there's still game to hunt, and just in general scavenging for food and the other things that you need. Now, the truth is that there are so many people on the planet, and there are so many people in the United States, particularly in the urban centers, that there's not going to be much to scavenge left because everybody is going to be scavenging. And if they can hunt at all, everyone is going to be hunting. And so sooner or later, there's not going to be any game to hunt, and there's not going to be any food or materials to scavenge. So right out of the gate, I would say if you really want to be a prepper, that you've got to realize that if a disaster comes and it lasts any length of time, the food, shelter, warmth, all the things we're addicted to, water, medical supplies, and ammunition, and all those things, all of that stuff, honestly, is going to be stuff you have set aside and provisioned for in advance. And if you haven't, you're likely to run out of it. And then when you go to scavenge, you're going to find there's an awful lot of people that haven't got it either, and they're going to be scavenging too. All right, with all of that having been said, I think the best survival technique is to provision for the future and make sure that you've got things set aside and then have a way to defend them. And that's probably the best thing. But for this little conversation, we're having some fun here. What is the best survival rifle? Well, if you're not going to get in gunfights, if you're going to be stealthy and you're going to try to make certain that you're doing the things you wish to do without necessarily being noticed, I would say maybe a 22 would be a little 22 rifle would be a great survival gun, if survival is the idea, because the ammunition is plentiful and inexpensive, and so you can stock a lot of it, although in recent years it's been pretty hard to come up with 22 long rifle at times. But you can stock a lot of it if you're just diligent about searching for it. The rifles are very accurate out to 50 yards, and in some cases out farther than that, 75, 100 yards. You can take small game with a 22 very, very easily. Birds, small animals, rabbits, squirrels, and indeed, if you had to, rats, and so on. And you can do so very effectively and very quietly if you stock, in addition to long rifle ammunition, if you stock the little short shorts or the super quiet ammunition that's meant to be fired in the backyard while you're in the city and makes hardly any noise at all, but is still, in many cases, potent enough to take a small bird or some small animal if you put the round right where it belongs and you hit them in the right spot. So that might be a great idea, to have a 22 long rifle and set it up for survival type hunting. Now, if you've got a single shot rifle or bolt action rifle or something along those lines, or pump action rifle, that may be not nearly as effective if you happen to get in a defensive situation. Not that you want to be defending yourself with a 22 if you can possibly avoid it. It's not the best choice for self-defense, but it is a great choice for all the other things. Of course, if it's a semi-automatic rifle, something like a Ruger 1022, which is not my favorite, but nevertheless it is a lot of people's favorites, or something like a Marlin Model 60, which I dearly love those things. They're semi-automatics, and they've got a tube magazine. And one of the things I like about them, I do not like about the magazine-fed ones where you have a detachable magazine, is with a Ruger, if you lose the magazine, you're stuck. You now have a single-shot rifle. With a tube-fed magazine, the magazine's part of the rifle, so all you have to have is loose ammo and fill it up, and you can very easily, with a piece of tubing, make yourself a speed loader for that, so that you can dump them in there all at once and load it very fast. They also hold, in some cases, I think 14 or 15 rounds, so there's a lot of ammunition in those little semi-automatic guns, and they work really, really well. I have a Marlin Model 60, and I can tell you the thing is a deadly gun when it comes to rabbit hunting or whatever. And you put a little scope on it, and there you go. I mean, they're not terribly expensive. You don't have to spend a lot of money tweaking them, and you've got yourself a great little rifle you can hunt with, you can take small game with all day long, and that'll work extraordinarily well. And if you're in an area where you need it to be quiet, well, you can make yourself a makeshift silencer on the end of it, or suppressor on the end of it if you want to, with a soda bottle. I mean, that's not going to be perfect, but it's easy to do, and it's a matter of taking a water bottle or something and taping it on the end. I've done it. It's good for one shot or maybe two, but if you're only taking one shot and you're going to take a piece, you take some game or something, as long as the bottle is small enough for you to be able to sight over the top of, you've got a makeshift suppressor that will quiet the gun down. And then again, like I said, if you use that real quiet ammunition, the little shorties, I forget what they call them, those things are awesome. And they're not going to cycle a semi-automatic gun, but you can cycle it manually, and at least you can use it to take one shot. Now, that's where the advantage of the bolt gun or single-shot guns is that you can load any ammunition and cycle it without any problem. Obviously, in a semi-automatic, it's not going to cycle the action if you have weak ammunition like that. But it still can be done, and it still can be fired through them rather accurately and rather effectively. You just want to make sure you don't end up with a squib as a result, and so you want to check the barrel, run a cleaning rod down it, and make sure that, periodically, make sure you don't have a round in there in case you're using that really cheap, ammunition that's real weak, and you press the trigger and you don't feel like something came out the other end. But you can certainly take doves and chucker and small birds like that and put food on the table as long as those animals are still around and everybody hadn't killed them all. So there you are. So I don't know. I'm in favor of the .22 rifle as being the king of survival rifles, whatever type of .22 rifle you might happen to have. That would be the king of survival rifles in my mind. And then if you have as a companion a good, solid center fire handgun of some kind, either a revolver or that's a duty size revolver, something like a 357 Magnum or a 38 Special or 44 Special or 41 Special, something like that. Or you happen to have a semi-automatic handgun, a Glock would be a great example, or something in 9mm or 40 or 45. 9mm, truthfully, is probably the most popular choice of those ammunition selections. And so if you had a 9mm handgun and a .22 rifle, you've got a handgun to fight with up close, a .22 rifle to hunt with, and you're done. How about that? You can have your handgun on you while you're out hunting. If somebody wants to pick a fight with you, you've got something bigger to fight with, and you don't have to lug a whole bunch of guns around. I don't know. That seems to work for me. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. What do you think is the ideal survival rifle? And we get down to survival. Maybe we ought to consider exactly what part of town you're in, or what part of America you live in, or whether you live in an urban or suburban or rural setting, and perhaps that changes what your survival might be. It could be completely different than what I've just suggested. It might not be a .22 at all. Could be a larger caliber rifle. Could be a shotgun. Might be just about anything. Could be even a smaller, less powerful gun than a .22. We can talk about that too. Might not be that a handgun is good enough. You might want to have a center fire fighting rifle along with your .22 rifle that you hunt with. But you're still pretty much down to two guns and two types of ammunition. I think that's the key is, if you're going to think about survival, you might have a collection of a lot of guns, but you got to whittle down what ammo you're going to use in an emergency and what guns you're going to take with you if you got to leave, because you can't take everything, and you certainly can't take 15 different kinds of ammo with you. You might have a lot of guns that you like, but you got to pick that one rifle or that one shotgun or that one handgun. And if you have a family, try to standardize on that one caliber so that you're not carting 50 different calibers around. And if you have to bug out, you're all standardized on something. It may not be that you use the same magazines in your handguns, or you might have different magazines, different guns. That's not necessarily as positive as being standardized on the same pistol platform, but let's face it, everybody's a little different. But you might standardize on the same rifle, and you might standardize on the same ammo at least. 9mm handgun, for example, or 40 or 45 or whatever you choose as your standard, and a .22 rifle or 17 if you want to go there. I think I'd stay with .22s, are more common. And whatever your fighting rifle is, and that's it. And that's probably what you're going to take with you, and that's all. So anyway, I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Let me know what you think. Which rifle is the best survival rifle, or which gun, for that matter, would be the best survival gun? Now, before we go on to this next segment, which is kind of a continuation of this one in an odd sort of way, I thought I would mention to you Second Call Defense. I get a lot of questions as to which company to use for your concealed carry or defensive firearm insurance. Now, there's a lot of them out there. I know NRA's got a brand new one, and there's a few others, and they've been out there for a while. Second Call Defense has been around a long time. And indeed, my understanding is Second Call Defense was the initial service supported by the NRA until the NRA wanted to start its own, and then had to learn what it was doing in some way or other, really, from Second Call Defense, because they had to look at them to figure out how to do it. Well, that says a lot and speaks volumes. Now, don't get me wrong. I support the NRA, but at the same time, I got to go for the service that's the best, and that's why I use Second Call Defense to defend my family, and I urge you to check them out to defend yours. Check out the link in the description, secondcall.com. self-defense.
You're listening to the GunGuyTV podcast.
Now, along the lines of what I was just talking about, I've been giving some serious thought for quite a while to picking up a solid, well-built, accurate hunting pellet gun. And I can't spend $2,000 on a pellet gun. I was talking to a guy at the range, and I mentioned my desire to get a solid pellet gun to use to hunt with. And he's all about this, these rifles he's mentioning to me, and I'm thinking, wow, I've never heard of those. And then I found out they were $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, and I realized why I've never heard of them. Look, I'm an average working stiff. I haven't got that kind of money to spend on a gun, on any gun, let alone a pellet gun, for crying out loud. But, Gammo makes some good ones, and I'm not selling Gammo here. I'm just mentioning them off the top of my head. They have one particular one, the Gammo Whisper, which I thought would be kind of interesting, and I want to investigate that. And I think if I don't get one between now and January, I'll go over to the Gammo booth at SHOT Show and talk with them about it a little bit and check them out there, because my understanding is they work really, really well. I haven't hunted with any of them, so I don't know. But I'll tell you a little funny experience I had this year. And I wish I'd have had one, because I went, first of all, I live in sort of a suburban setting. So if I were to crank off a 22 round anywhere near my house, all of my neighbors, or potentially most of my neighbors at least, would know that a gun had gone off. So I'm not out in some rural setting where my nearest neighbor is 5 miles away and isn't going to know the difference. I'm in a suburban setting where, I live in the burbs, okay? And if I do something in my backyard, even though, we've got a decent-sized lot and like that, if I do something in my backyard, my neighbors on three sides are going to know that I did it, and maybe the neighbor across the street or down the street as well. So firing guns in my backyard is probably not a good idea. First of all, it's illegal where I live, and secondly, it's going to announce that I've done it everywhere. However, here I go with my lifelong friend Chris, out dove hunting, and you may have seen the videos on YouTube or VidMe of my dove hunt, in which I think we all saw the same bird 6 times hunting. And for the first time in, decades, I actually went home and did not get a single bird. In fact, I never took the safety off of my shotgun because I never saw a bird that I could shoot at. So my gun was on safe the entire time I was there. I might as well have just left the gun in the truck, or left the ammo in the truck and carried the empty gun. It would have been lighter, and sat there and drank my my Gatorade or whatever I was drinking while I was looking at the the birds fly by, all of which were not doves except for one, and enjoying the incredible heat in the Anza Borrego desert around Borrego Springs, California. So I get home from that, having not seen any doves except when we were at the motel. And if we'd have been on top of the roof of the motel, we could have limited out in 5 minutes. But we went hunting where you're supposed to hunt, and I think all the birds knew, and they didn't show up. So I get home, and I'm driving to the driveway, and I start taking the stuff out of the car, and I'm making the trips back and forth into the house to take stuff in the house and put stuff away. And I walk out the front door, and there, across the street on a telephone line, are about 40 or so doves sitting up there. Mourning doves, a couple of white wings, and some Eurasians, the ringnecks were up there, the big ones. And I'm looking at them, and I said out loud, now I know where you knuckleheads have been, because I couldn't get them. And since the opening day of dove season, which has been a couple, 2-3 weeks now, everywhere I go, there are a bazillion doves. And it's like that every year around my house. There's just doves everywhere. And so I've said to my wife a number of times, if I only had an outstanding pellet gun, I could get my limit in the backyard. And that's true. I could. All I'd have to do is put some seed out there, and I'd have doves galore. And probably in, half an hour to 45 minutes, I'd have my limit of doves and never have to drive anywhere to do it. And that got me thinking about the whole concept of being in an urban or suburban environment where I may be forced for a short time at least to augment the supplies I have during an emergency with some light hunting. Take a dove, take a small animal, a squirrel or a rabbit. We do have rabbits around here, and little cottontails and different animals that if you happen to be in the right place at the right time and you know where to look, you can get a small animal here or there. And frankly, I got to tell you, I don't know how many of my neighbors would know how to do that. As far as I know, there aren't any of them that hunt other than me. I had one neighbor that hunted that was down the road that loved to go duck hunting, but he's since moved, and now that's a rental. And so I don't think Miguel is around anymore very often. So as far as I know, there's nobody on my street that hunts, which sort of leaves the hunting up to me. And if I had a little pellet gun that was reasonably quiet, I could probably take some small game for days and maybe beyond that without any problem at all. And nobody would know that I did it. Now, as opposed to busting out my 22 and cranking off a round and having the whole world know that I'm doing something. So I kind of like the idea in an urban or suburban environment, particularly, in having that hunting grade pellet gun designed for hunting so that I know that I could take small game with it. A rabbit, a squirrel, a raccoon maybe. We do have those around here. Possum, we have possums around here. And small birds, dove, chukar, different kinds of birds that are extremely edible. You can take those with a pellet gun like that. And so I'm really interested in getting one. Honestly, not so much for emergency purposes, although if you get such a gun and you want to buy the high-dollar pellets, you can load up on those things, and you've got some outstanding ammunition in a gun that will feed you as long as there's small game to take. They're extremely accurate. I have shot them. I just don't own one. And after I started thinking about it, I started thinking about a few buddies of mine who shall remain nameless, who every year get their limit of doves in their backyard. And they've told me about it before over the years, and I kind of had forgotten about it until I went out in the desert and came back skunked with nothing. So I'm wondering, the earlier conversation, first part of the podcast was, which gun is the best survival gun? And I think it depends, in large part, I think it depends on where you are. What kind of area do you live in? What kind of weather is the area in? What kind of animals are there for you to take? And indeed, what kind of noise will you be able to make without attracting people or attention from people that you don't want to know or that you're there? At some point, being stealthy is a good thing, because if you have food, shelter, warmth, and all those things that other people are lacking, they're going to try to take it from you. And you don't want to be in a position where you have to fight if you can possibly avoid it, because in that kind of environment where there is no medical care and there is no help and there are no emergency services, if you get a bullet wound, you're done. I mean, truthfully, in that kind of environment, if you get an infected tooth, that could kill you just from the infection. It doesn't take a whole heck of a lot if you don't have the right medications and you don't have the right kind of help. So in every way, you would want to avoid any kind of serious injury. And let's face it, a bullet wound is a serious injury. So while it's kind of nice in the video games to play that game, it's not so nice in real life. Avoiding contact with people you don't want to have contact with, making sure that you've done everything to be stealthy so they don't even know you're there, and doing your best to survive quietly, it seems to me, would be the best possible choice. So perhaps if you live in an environment like I do, or one that's perhaps even more congested than where I live. Mine is not congested terribly, but, there's some neighborhoods that really are. Some folks live in downtown areas and high-rises and so on. What kind of defensive tool do you use there? Do you use a 30 caliber rifle like an M1 Garand or a Fall or something like that, or an AR-10 when you live in a high-rise condo downtown? I don't think so. You'll never use it. It's going to be too big and too long and too difficult to cart around in tight places, so that's not the best choice for you. And if you live in my neighborhood, I don't need something like that. I'd go through 37 walls and kill people I didn't want to kill and do damage I didn't want to do and crank off a loud weapon that people would hear for miles. I think a 22 is better as long as I'm not in a fight. And maybe, just maybe for me, that hunter-gatherer tool doesn't need to be a 22. Maybe it's a really quiet, very professional, extremely well-made pellet gun with a reputation for success hunting small game. Now, if you're a bowman or you're really good with a bow, maybe that's your answer. I don't know. I'm not. I mean, I enjoy archery, but if you want me to hunt with it, I'm going to starve to death. I can tell you that right now. And so that's not my tool. I'm a gun guy. I'm not an archery guy. As much as I enjoy doing it, I couldn't use it effectively. I don't have the training or skill set to use that effectively to provide food for myself and my family. However, I've been hunting for a very long time with guns, so that I know how to do. And if I were going to have a bow of some sort, it would probably be a crossbow, because that would emulate what I know, as opposed to being a compound bow or a longbow or something that I'd have to, learn a whole new skill set for. So absent that, I'm thinking that pellet gun idea with a nice little scope on it, that's a pretty dandy idea, and I'm really seriously considering trying to get one this year or next year rather than the 22. Although I have 22s as well, and I have a battery of guns where I have fighting rifles and hunting rifles and hunting shotguns and all kinds of things. So I'm not running a shortage of guns to do these things with, but the one gun I don't have, the one kind of gun I don't have, is that high dollar pellet gun. Now, I've looked at the Gammo guns, and again, I'm not advertising them. I've shot them. There may be some that are better, and certainly if you've done this, if you have already gone through this thought process and you know the answer, let me know, because I'm just kind of exploring while I'm talking with you. But I'm looking at the Gammo guns, and I'm seeing about $300, or a little less maybe in some cases, maybe a little more, but certainly under $400. And in most cases, even with you start getting a little bit expensive, it's under $500 or $600, and you've got a really good hunting pellet gun. And that appeals to me. They're also pretty light and so on. Now, the other thing is, obviously you can't hunt with an AR in an urban setting. First of all, if you shoot the bunny rabbit with the AR, you're not going to have a lot of bunny rabbit left. It's just not a good plan. And you can't go hunting the bunny rabbit with a shotgun in an urban or suburban setting, because you've announced to the world that you're there. So in that case, the 22 with a really quiet ammunition would be best. But short of that, and I'm going to argue maybe even better than that, is the pellet gun. So I don't know. I've got to give it some additional thought. I'd love to know what you think, though. So if you haven't already done this, or you haven't gone through this thought process, or if you have, for that matter, please share with me what you're thinking about the best survival gun. Now, I'm going to tell you a little secret now that I've gone through all of this. The truth is, there is no such thing as the best survival gun. It's like which is the prettiest woman? That's a subjective thing. What's the greatest hair color? That's a subjective thing. Which is the best car to own? Those are all subjective things, and we like different things. So if you ask 100 people in a room to tell you which is the best survival gun, you're probably going to get 100 different answers, and I'm not sure that any of them would be wrong, because each one of us is different. Each one of us live in different circumstances, and each one of us have different things we have to consider in making that choice. So I sort of led you down the primrose path here into an argument that is a silly one. Which is the best survival gun? For crying out loud, if I posted that on Facebook, it would go. Maybe that's not a bad idea if I wanted to get more clicks. If I argued, but I'm not a troll, so I'm not going to create arguments. But I do want to know what your thoughts are on it. I can tell you that whatever your thoughts are for you, you're probably right. For me, it might be something entirely different, and you know what? That's okay. The important thing is that we've given it some thought, and we've prepared as best we can to make sure that if something does happen where we have to survive, we're able to take care of ourselves and our families. That's one of the many reasons we have a magical thing called a Constitution, and a more precious thing maybe in there, the various and sundry amendments which protect our rights under God. And one of them is the Second Amendment, which guarantees our right to keep and bear arms for a host of reasons, not least of which is surviving during difficult times, particularly in an environment where we've had now, hurricane season is happening again, and of course the world is talking about how horrible it is, and my sister who lives in Florida has simply said, no, it's no big deal, it's just hurricane season. That's what she said to me after Hurricane Irma went buzzing over her house. We Skyped a little bit, and I asked her how her house was doing. She said, okay, the yard got a little messed up, and some of the trees got messed up, but the house is okay, and this is about my 19th hurricane, or my 18th or 15th hurricane, or some stupid thing like that. And she said, I don't know why you guys get all upset about it. We're in Florida. We're used to this. It shockingly, I don't want to surprise anybody, Hurricane season happens every year. It's not new. They look at hurricanes the way we do at earthquakes. And there's been some tragedies there in Mexico. I have some friends, many friends, who live in Mexico, and we've been praying for them. So it's entirely possible we might end up with a natural disaster where we have to defend ourselves and feed ourselves. Which gun is the best survival gun? Let me know in the comments. I've given you my ideas, and I could be completely wrong, so help me out. Thank you very much for listening. I really do appreciate the fact that you do. Please, if you haven't already, join the NRA. There's a link for you to do that right in the description. And if you wouldn't mind, shop our little Amazon link on our website if you buy things from Amazon. It'll cost you the same. Everything's the same, but we get a little commission, and it helps support GunGuyTV. Thank you already for the incredible support that you provide. I'm very, very grateful that you do what you do. Have a great week. Thank you again, and please be safe.
You've been listening to the GunGuy TV podcast.